You know that magical moment when you realize your husband thinks you're not just naive, but completely brain dead? Well, I discovered that my dear Greg had such a low opinion of my intelligence that he thought I wouldn't notice him planning a romantic getaway with his side piece. Spoiler alert, I'm Anna Thompson, and I notice everything, especially when my credit card statements start looking like a romance novel's shopping list. It all started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. Greg was humming in the shower, which should have been my first red flag because the man usually sounds like a dying walrus when he's happy. I was making coffee, pretending to be the perfect suburban housewife, when I spotted his phone buzzing on the counter. Now, I'm not usually the snooping type, but when a text pops up saying, "Can't wait for our weekend, baby," from someone named Amanda with way too many heart emojis, well, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought her back with receipts. See, Greg had been pulling the classic working late routine for months. Apparently, his new project required a lot of evening meetings, weekend consultations, and mysterious phone calls taken in the garage. I started calling him Project Manager of the Year, though his project seemed to involve more heavy breathing than actual work. The man who used to complain about staying 5 minutes past 5 was suddenly Mr. Dedication himself. How inspiring. But the real masterpiece was watching him lie to my face with the enthusiasm of a community theater actor. "Honey, I have this mandatory business retreat this weekend," he announced over dinner, cutting his steak with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "You know how boring these corporate things are. You'd hate it." Oh, how considerate of him to spare me from the drudgery of whatever Amanda was planning to do to him in that hotel room. I played along beautifully. "Oh no, that sounds terrible. Where is it again?" I asked, batting my eyelashes like the concerned wife I was supposed to be. "Ocean View Resort up the coast. Really dull conference stuff. PowerPoints about quarterly projections." Right, because nothing says quarterly projections like booking the honeymoon suite at the most romantic resort in the state. The same resort I'd been dropping hints about for our anniversary for 3 years running. Apparently it was perfect for business. Just not business with his wife. The funniest part? Greg actually thought he was clever. He'd been covering his tracks like a master criminal, deleting messages, paying with cash, even changing his cologne. Though honestly, switching from Old Spice to something that smelled like it cost more than my car payment wasn't exactly subtle. But sure, keep believing you're James Bond, sweetheart. Meanwhile, I did what any reasonable woman would do. I played detective. And let me tell you, Greg left a paper trail longer than the Constitution. Hotel receipts accidentally left in his jacket pocket. Restaurant charges to places we'd never been together. A sudden interest in expensive lingerie, which definitely wasn't ending up in my drawer. It was like watching someone try to hide an elephant by putting a tiny umbrella over it. But here's where it gets really delicious. While digging through his masterfully hidden evidence, I discovered something that made my day. Amanda had no idea he was married. Based on the love-struck messages I found, she genuinely believed she was dating a successful bachelor who was finally ready to get serious. The poor girl was probably planning their future wedding while I was planning his funeral. Metaphorically speaking, of course. That's when inspiration struck like lightning. Why just confront him like every other betrayed wife? Why settle for a boring screaming match when I could orchestrate something truly memorable? After all, Greg had gone to such trouble planning his romantic weekend. It would be rude not to show my appreciation. And I knew exactly who should join me for this special occasion. Enter Nancy Carter, my delightful mother-in-law. Now Nancy has always been special. In her eyes, Greg could do no wrong. If he burned down the house, she'd blame me for not buying fireproof curtains. When he forgot our anniversary, it was because I put too much pressure on him. When he left his dirty socks everywhere, it was because I wasn't appreciating his hard work enough. According to Nancy, I was lucky to have such a perfect son-in-law, and any problems in our marriage were clearly my fault for not worshiping him properly. Nancy had been waiting for years for me to admit that I wasn't good enough for her precious boy. She'd drop hints about how Greg deserved better with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Family dinners were like sitting through a one-woman show titled, "Why Anna Isn't Good Enough for My Perfect Son." She probably had a PowerPoint presentation ready. So naturally, Nancy was the perfect person to invite to Greg's romantic getaway. After all, what's more romantic than having your mother witness your son's infidelity firsthand? The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. Nancy had always wanted to see me grovel, to admit that Greg was too good for me. Well, I was about to give her a front row seat to exactly what kind of man her precious son really was. It was going to be better than any soap opera she'd ever watched. I called Nancy that same afternoon, pouring on the sugar thicker than maple syrup. "Nancy, I've been thinking about what you said about Greg and me needing to work on our relationship." She practically purred through the phone. Finally, the daughter-in-law was admitting defeat. "I was wondering if you'd like to come away with me this weekend. A little mother-daughter bonding time. Maybe you could help me understand how to be a better wife to Greg." The woman nearly wept with joy. After 5 years of marriage, I was finally asking for her wisdom. She'd been waiting for this moment longer than people waited in line for the latest iPhone. "Oh, Anna, I always knew you'd come around. Greg is such a special man, and I have so much to teach you about taking care of him properly." I almost choked on my coffee. Taking care of him properly? Lady, I'd been taking care of everything while your son was out there playing house with Amanda. But I kept my voice sweet as artificial sugar. "I've booked us a lovely weekend at the Ocean View Resort. We can have spa treatments, nice dinners, and long talks about how to make Greg happy." Nancy was practically vibrating with excitement. She'd been dreaming of this intervention for years. In her mind, she was about to save her son's marriage by teaching his inadequate wife how to properly worship at the altar of Greg. She probably started planning the lecture series, How to Appreciate My Perfect Son 101, and Advanced Techniques in Greg Worship. Meanwhile, I was making my own preparations. I booked the room right across the hall from the honeymoon suite Greg had reserved for his romantic weekend. Because if you're going to crash a party, you might as well have the best seats in the house. I even requested a room with a view of the lobby, purely for educational purposes, of course. The next few days were like watching a comedy show. Greg was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement about his secret weekend. He'd hum in the shower, whistle while getting dressed, and check his phone every 5 minutes with the goofy grin of a teenager with his first crush. The man who usually complained about everything was suddenly Mr. Sunshine. It was almost insulting how happy the prospect of cheating on me made him. He even started being extra nice to me, which was hilarious in the most pathetic way possible. Guilty conscience much? He brought me flowers, wilted ones from the gas station, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? He offered to do the dishes, badly. He even suggested we watch a movie together, though he spent the entire time texting someone and trying to hide it behind a throw pillow. Smooth as sandpaper, that one. Nancy, meanwhile, was preparing for our weekend like she was going to war. She called me 3 times to discuss what we should pack, what we should talk about, and how exactly she was going to fix my attitude toward her son. She had notes, actual written notes about my shortcomings as a wife. She was ready to deliver the performance of her lifetime. "I've prepared some talking points about what Greg needs in a marriage," she informed me during one of our planning calls. "He's such a sensitive soul, you know. He needs a wife who understands his artistic nature." Artistic nature? The man's idea of art was fantasy football statistics. But sure, Nancy, let's go with that. The best part was watching Greg try to act casual about his business trip. He practiced his story so much he started believing it himself. He'd randomly bring up fake details about his imaginary conference, like he was method acting. "Oh, did I mention the keynote speaker is talking about market trends? Fascinating stuff. Really wish you could come. But you know how boring business stuff is for you." Right. Because I, with my MBA and years of corporate experience, couldn't possibly understand the complexities of quarterly projections. But Amanda, who according to her social media worked at a boutique and posted inspirational quotes about finding your soulmate, was clearly the intellectual powerhouse he needed for those deep business discussions. The irony was thicker than Nancy's makeup. Greg was about to get caught red-handed because he underestimated the 2 women in his life who knew him best. Well, I knew him best. Nancy just thought she did. But both of us were about to get a very educational weekend about who Greg Carter really was when he thought nobody was watching. As Friday approached, I could barely contain my excitement. Greg was packing his business casual wardrobe, which apparently included silk boxers and cologne that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Nancy was packing her intervention materials and probably a PowerPoint presentation about proper wife behavior, and I was packing popcorn for the show. The stage was set, the players were ready, and Greg had no idea he was about to star in the worst romantic comedy of his life. Sometimes the universe really does have a sense of humor. It just takes a while to get to the punchline. Friday morning arrived like Christmas morning, except instead of presents under the tree, I had front row seats to the destruction of my marriage. Greg was practically vibrating with excitement, checking his phone every 30 seconds and humming what I'm pretty sure was supposed to be romantic music, but sounded more like a dying car engine. "Okay, honey, I'm heading out for my business retreat," he announced, adjusting his tie like he was going to accept an Oscar instead of commit adultery. He'd spent more time on his appearance that morning than he had for our actual wedding. New cologne, expensive shirt, and those silk boxers I'd accidentally discovered while doing laundry. Because nothing says quarterly projections like underwear that costs more than most people's car payments. I played my part perfectly, giving him a sweet goodbye kiss while secretly wondering if Amanda knew she was kissing a married man, or if she thought that guilty look in his eyes was just business anxiety. "Have fun with your presentations," I said, managing not to choke on the word. "I'll miss you so much." The man actually had the audacity to look guilty for about 2 seconds before remembering he was supposed to be excited about fictional spreadsheets. "I'll miss you too, sweetheart. Don't wait up. These business dinners can run pretty late." "Oh, I bet they can, especially when they involve candlelit tables and whatever Amanda planned to wear for their romantic evening." Nancy arrived exactly an hour later, armed with enough luggage for a month-long expedition and what appeared to be actual research materials about marriage improvement. The woman had come prepared for battle. She had books, articles she'd printed from the internet, and probably a detailed action plan for turning me into the perfect wife for her perfect son. "Anna, dear, I'm so proud of you for finally recognizing that you need guidance," she said, settling into my passenger seat like a general preparing for war. "Greg is such a special man, and I have so many insights to share about what makes him happy." I nodded enthusiastically while internally calculating exactly what time Greg and Amanda would arrive at the resort. According to his carefully hidden itinerary, which he'd left right there on his desk like the criminal mastermind he wasn't, they had dinner reservations at 7. Perfect timing for our mother-daughter bonding session to accidentally stumble into the dining room. The drive to Ocean View Resort was like listening to a one-woman TED Talk titled, "Why My Son is Perfect and You're Not." Nancy regaled me with stories of Greg's childhood, his achievements, his sensitive nature, and his desperate need for a wife who truly appreciated his wonderfulness. According to her, every argument we'd ever had was my fault for not understanding his complex emotional needs. "Greg has always been so thoughtful," she explained as we passed mile marker 52. "Remember when he surprised you with that weekend away for your birthday? He put so much effort into planning something special for you." I almost laughed out loud. That surprise weekend had been him forgetting our plans and booking the first available hotel room when I called him out on it. We'd ended up at a motel next to a truck stop, where the romantic ambiance was provided by the dulcet tones of 18-wheelers and the enchanting aroma of diesel fuel. "But sure, Nancy, let's call that thoughtful. He's just so considerate of others," she continued, warming up to her favorite topic. "Sometimes I think you don't appreciate how lucky you are to have such a caring husband." Caring. Right. So caring that he was currently driving to a romantic resort with another woman while his mother lectured his wife about not appreciating him enough. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, serve it on a platter, and charge admission for people to watch it. As we pulled into the resort parking lot, I spotted Greg's car immediately, because of course he'd parked right in front, probably so excited about his romantic weekend that subtlety had gone right out the window along with his marriage vows. His precious BMW was sitting there like evidence at a crime scene, practically waving a flag that said, "Cheating husband here." Nancy was still chattering about Greg's wonderful qualities as we checked in. The desk clerk gave us our room keys with a professional smile, probably thinking we were just a normal mother and daughter-in-law having a bonding weekend. If only she knew she was about to witness the most spectacular family drama since Thanksgiving dinner at the Kardashians. Our room was perfect, directly across from the honeymoon suite, and with a clear view of the main lobby through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd requested specific accommodations, and the resort had delivered beautifully. It was like having VIP seating at the theater, except the show was my husband's moral bankruptcy, and the ticket price was my marriage. "What a lovely view," Nancy commented, admiring the ocean vista. "Greg would love this place. You should bring him here sometime." Oh, Nancy. Sweet, clueless Nancy. If only you knew your precious boy was already here, probably unpacking his silk underwear and practicing his romantic moves in the mirror. "That's a wonderful idea," I agreed. "I'm sure he'd find it very educational." As evening approached, Nancy began her transformation into full intervention mode. She'd changed into what she clearly considered her most authoritative outfit, and had her printed articles arranged like battle plans on the hotel room desk. She was ready to save her son's marriage by explaining to me exactly how inadequate I was as a wife. "Now, Anna," she began, settling into the hotel chair like a talk show host about to deliver life-changing advice. "Let's talk about what Greg really needs from a partner." I checked my watch. 6:30. Perfect timing. "You know what, Nancy? I think this conversation would be better over dinner. Why don't we head down to the restaurant? Sometimes a change of scenery helps with important discussions." Nancy practically glowed with excitement. Finally, her daughter-in-law was ready to receive wisdom. She gathered her materials like a professor heading to the most important lecture of her career. "What a wonderful idea. Greg always says he does his best thinking over a good meal." As we headed toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of movement across the hall. Room service delivering champagne and roses to the honeymoon suite. Greg was certainly pulling out all the stops for Amanda. Too bad he was about to get an audience he wasn't expecting. The elevator doors closed, and Nancy continued her lecture about appreciating Greg's finer qualities. In about 10 minutes, she was going to get a first-hand education about exactly what those finer qualities looked like when he thought nobody was watching. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it's a show served live, with front-row seats for the people who need to see it most. The hotel restaurant was the kind of place that screamed romantic getaway. Dim lighting, soft jazz, and enough intimate corner tables to hide a small army of cheating spouses. Nancy and I were seated at a prime table with a perfect view of the entrance, which was exactly what I'd requested when making our reservation. Customer service at its finest. Nancy had spread her marriage improvement materials across the table like a general planning a military campaign. She was in full lecture mode, explaining Greg's emotional complexity while I nodded and made appropriate listening noises. "You see, Anna, Greg has always been sensitive about feeling unappreciated," she was saying, adjusting her reading glasses to consult her printed articles about husband management. That's when the magic happened. At exactly 7:15, Greg walked into the restaurant with a woman who definitely wasn't his mother or his wife. Amanda was everything I'd expected from her social media photos. Young, blonde, and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She looked like she'd stepped out of a romantic comedy, all glowing and excited about her fairy tale weekend with her mysterious bachelor boyfriend. Greg looked like a man who thought he was the star of his own romantic movie. He'd styled his hair differently, was wearing a suit I'd never seen before, and had that confident swagger of someone who believed he was clever enough to pull off a double life. The poor, deluded fool. Nancy was mid-sentence about Greg's need for emotional support when she spotted them. I watched her face go through the 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. Confusion. Who is that woman with someone who looks like Greg? Denial. That can't be my son, he's at a business conference. Bargaining. Maybe it's a work colleague. Anger. The slow dawning realization. And finally, acceptance mixed with absolute mortification. "Is that?" she whispered, her voice trailing off as Greg leaned over to kiss Amanda's cheek while the hostess led them to their table. A corner table. Intimate lighting. Champagne already waiting. This wasn't a business dinner unless Greg had dramatically changed career paths. "Yes," I said simply, taking a sip of my wine and watching Nancy's world crumble in real time. "That's your son, having a business meeting with his project manager." The hostess seated them 3 tables away from us, close enough to see everything, far enough away that Greg hadn't noticed his wife and mother sitting across the restaurant like a jury at his trial. He was completely absorbed in Amanda, who was hanging on his every word like he was reciting poetry instead of probably lying about his imaginary bachelor lifestyle. Nancy's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. For the first time in 5 years, she was absolutely speechless. The woman who had an opinion about everything, who could lecture for hours about Greg's perfection, was staring at her son feeding another woman dessert with the romantic intensity of a Hallmark movie. But he said, Nancy stammered, still clutching her marriage improvement articles like they could somehow explain away what she was seeing. He said he was at a business conference. I finished helpfully. Funny how those business conferences look a lot like romantic dinners with women who aren't his wife. That's when Amanda laughed at something Greg said. A bright, genuine laugh that carried across the restaurant. She looked so happy, so completely unaware that she was the other woman in someone else's marriage. Greg had probably told her he was divorced, or single, or whatever story worked best for his fantasy weekend. Nancy's face was cycling through colors like a mood ring having a breakdown. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "Greg would never... He's not the type to... cheat on his wife with a woman young enough to be his daughter while his mother thinks he's a saint?" I suggested, watching Greg hold Amanda's hand across the table like they were the only 2 people in the world. "You're right, Nancy. That doesn't sound like the Greg you know at all." The waitress came to check on us, probably wondering why one of her customers looked like she'd seen a ghost, and the other was calmly eating her salad while watching the floor show. "Everything okay here, ladies?" "Perfect," I said with a smile. "We're just enjoying the dinner theater." Nancy was staring at Greg like she'd never seen him before. Because, honestly, she hadn't. She'd created this perfect son fantasy, and reality was currently feeding chocolate-covered strawberries to a woman who wasn't his wife while making promises he had no intention of keeping. "We have to do something," Nancy finally managed to say, her voice shaking. "Oh, we're going to do something," I assured her, signaling the waitress for another bottle of wine. "But first, let's let them finish their romantic dinner. After all, Greg went to so much trouble planning this special evening." I could see Nancy's brain trying to process the situation. Years of defending Greg's behavior, of blaming me for every problem in our marriage, of insisting that her son was incapable of doing wrong, all of it crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. Across the restaurant, Greg was now showing Amanda something on his phone, probably photos from his carefully curated bachelor life. No wedding pictures, no family photos with his wife, just the Greg Carter fantasy world where he was free to romance whoever caught his eye. "How long have you known?" Nancy asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the jazz music. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to plan this little educational weekend for both of us." Nancy looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Respect. And maybe a little fear. For the first time since I'd married her son, she was seeing me not as the inadequate wife who didn't appreciate Greg enough, but as the woman who'd been dealing with his lies while she lectured me about being a better partner. The dinner theater was about to move to Act 2, and Nancy Carter was about to get the education of her lifetime about who her precious son really was when he thought nobody was watching. The confrontation happened in the hotel lobby at precisely 9:30, right after Greg and Amanda finished their romantic dinner and were heading toward the elevators. I'd timed it perfectly. Maximum visibility, minimum escape routes, and just enough wine in my system to deliver the performance of my lifetime. Nancy and I positioned ourselves by the front desk, pretending to ask about spa services while watching Greg and Amanda approach the elevator bank. They were holding hands, whispering sweet nothings, completely lost in their romantic bubble. It was almost touching, if you ignored the whole married man thing. "Greg," I called out cheerfully, like I'd just spotted an old friend at the grocery store. "What a surprise seeing you here." The man literally froze mid-step. I watched all the color drain from his face as his brain tried to process why his wife and mother were standing in the lobby of his secret romantic getaway. Amanda looked confused but smiled politely, probably thinking I was someone from Greg's work. "Anna?" Greg's voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy. "What? How? You're supposed to be at home. Funny story, I said, walking over with Nancy trailing behind me like a zombie. Nancy and I decided to have a little mother-daughter bonding weekend. She had so much to teach me about being a better wife to you. I gestured toward Nancy, who was staring at her son like he'd grown a second head. Amanda's smile faltered as she started picking up on the tension. Greg, who are these women? Oh, how rude of him not to introduce us, I exclaimed, extending my hand to Amanda with a bright smile. I'm Anna Thompson-Carter, Greg's wife. Amanda's face went through the same emotional journey Nancy's had in the restaurant, but at triple speed. Confusion, realization, horror, and then pure fury as she looked between Greg and me like she was watching a tennis match from hell. Wife? Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. 5 years and counting, I confirmed cheerfully. And this is Nancy, Greg's mother. She was just telling me how Greg would never be the type to cheat. Weren't you, Nancy? Nancy finally found her voice, though it sounded like she'd been gargling with gravel. Gregory Matthew Carter. What is the meaning of this? Greg looked like he wanted to sink through the marble floor and disappear forever. The confident swagger from dinner had evaporated, leaving behind a stammering, sweating mess of a man. Mom, I can explain. Anna, this isn't what it looks like. Really? I tilted my head thoughtfully. Because it looks like you told your wife you were at a business conference while you brought your girlfriend to a romantic resort. But please, explain how that's not what it looks like. Amanda had gone from confused to mortified to absolutely livid. You told me you were divorced, she hissed at Greg, her voice carrying across the lobby and attracting the attention of other hotel guests. You said your ex-wife was crazy and bitter. Crazy and bitter, I repeated, genuinely delighted. Nancy, did you hear that? Your son thinks I'm crazy and bitter for expecting fidelity in my marriage. How unreasonable of me. Nancy was staring at Greg like she'd never seen him before, which was probably accurate. Gregory, is this true? Have you been lying to everyone? The beautiful thing about watching someone's carefully constructed lies fall apart is the panic in their eyes when they realize there's no story good enough to explain away reality. Greg's mouth was opening and closing like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. We were having problems, he finally managed, which was news to me since we'd been having what I thought were normal married couple discussions about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Problems? Amanda's voice was getting louder, and more hotel guests were starting to notice the free entertainment. You told me you were single. You've been lying to me for months. Months? Nancy repeated faintly. This was all new information for her, too. Since March, Amanda confirmed, her voice shaking with anger. He said he was ready to settle down, that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. He even talked about moving in together. I couldn't help but laugh. Moving in together? That's ambitious, considering he already lives with his wife. That's when Amanda did something absolutely magnificent. She picked up her wine glass from a nearby table. Apparently, she'd grabbed it during her exit from the restaurant, and threw the contents directly at Greg's face. Red wine dripped down his expensive shirt while the entire lobby burst into applause. You're a pathetic excuse for a man, Amanda announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. I hope your wife takes you for everything you're worth. She turned to me with a look of genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was married. I know you didn't, I said kindly. You were as much a victim of his lies as I was. Amanda gathered her dignity, walked to the elevator, and disappeared from Greg's life forever. The lobby audience was still watching our little drama unfold like it was better than cable television. Nancy finally found her voice again. Gregory, I am ashamed of you. Ashamed and embarrassed. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. Anna, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I've spent years blaming you for problems that were his fault all along. Nancy, Greg started, but his mother cut him off with a look that could have frozen lava. Don't you Nancy me. I raised you better than this. Your father would be rolling in his grave if he knew what kind of man you've become. The hotel manager appeared, probably worried about the scene disrupting their other guests' romantic evenings. Is everything all right here? Everything's perfect, I assured him. Just a little family reunion. Nothing we can't handle. Greg stood there dripping wine and dignity, realizing that his romantic weekend had turned into a public humiliation spectacular. His mother was disgusted with him. His wife was done with him. His girlfriend had dumped him, and half the hotel lobby had witnessed the whole thing. "Anna, please." He tried one last time. "We can work this out." "Oh, we're definitely going to work this out," I agreed. "My lawyer is very excited to meet with you on Monday morning." As Nancy and I walked toward the elevator, leaving Greg standing alone in the lobby like a scarecrow in an expensive suit, she grabbed my arm. "Anna, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not believing you. For always taking his side. For being blind to who he really was." "Nancy," I said gently, "you loved your son. There's nothing wrong with that. But now you know the truth." "What are you going to do?" she asked as the elevator doors closed behind us. "Well," I said, thinking about my consultation with the divorce attorney I'd scheduled for Monday morning, "I'm going to take Amanda's advice and make sure I get everything I'm worth. And then I'm going to build a life with people who actually deserve to be in it." 6 months later, Nancy and I have dinner every Tuesday. She insists on paying, which she calls her penance for being a terrible mother-in-law. Greg moved in with his parents after I got the house in the divorce settlement. According to Nancy, he spends most of his time on dating apps, trying to recreate his bachelor fantasy with increasingly younger women who ghost him once they realize he still lives with his mommy. Amanda sent me a friend request on social media, along with a message thanking me for saving her from making the biggest mistake of her life. Turns out she's dating a genuinely single guy now who thinks honesty is actually attractive. Revolutionary concept. As for me, I'm living my best life in my mortgage-free house, with my excellent lawyer who made sure Greg's business expenses at romantic hotels were properly documented for the divorce proceedings. I've learned that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living authentically, surrounded by people who value honesty over convenience. Nancy was right about one thing. Family is everything. She just had the wrong definition of family. Real family doesn't lie, cheat, and manipulate. Real family shows up, tells the truth, and apologizes when they're wrong. Sometimes it takes a spectacularly public humiliation in a hotel lobby to figure out who deserves to be in your life and who deserves to be left standing alone, dripping with wine and regret. The moral of the story? Never underestimate a woman who's tired of being underestimated, especially when she has a mother-in-law who's finally ready to see the truth about her not-so-perfect son.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.